Hello, everybody. I am Tony DeMeo, and this is Tony D's Music Channel. Now, today I want to talk to you about a topic very important to me, and that would be the time that George Harrison had 4 songs he wrote rejected by Mo Ostin of the Warner Brothers record label. Now, this happened in 1980 when he turned in the first draft of his album, Somewhere in England. And Mo Ostin told him to change the album so the album was more commercial. And he did not like that one of the songs was a protest song, and he found the lyrics too damning. That protest song being Tears of the World. Now, that song was officially released in 2004 when George's album 76, 33 and a Third, was officially released on CD, and Tears of the World was a bonus track. It should have been on an album from George all along, but finally it was put on an album on CD. Now, that was one of the first Harrison albums I bought myself at Best Buy, and I have it right here. I love that cover photo. And look at the back. An additional track is Tears of the World, produced by George Harrison. Of course. Tears of the World was George writing a ferocious and acerbic protest song in the 70s. And unfortunately, for all of us, I believe, protest songs were no more the rage at that time. They were really most popular in the 60s. And by the 70s and the 80s, record labels didn't want anything to do with them, which is why Mo Ostin rejected this song. But if you listen to this song now, in 2024, it is a based, as the kids say, protest song. It's anti-war. The very first lyric mentions warmongers. While warmongers terrorize us all, leaders beat them to the call. He sings, "No use in turning a blind eye." And that's a song I've heard since I was 16 years old. It's had a profound effect on me and how I view the world. That we cannot ignore what's going on around us and the tears of people who are suffering. George was in a very bad place in the 70s, and he put on that concert in Bangladesh. And thinking about that really brought him a lot of sadness, thinking about what's going on around him. And he was a very rare person in that sense. Most people didn't really care about what was happening around them. Most people gave up on all that trying to save the world stuff in the 70s. But he really did care. He joined Greenpeace in the 80s. In the 90s, he promoted the Natural Law Party. Natural. A political party in 1990 in England that was trying to preach, quote unquote, transcendental meditation to everyone. That was their political platform, and that did not succeed. But he was always trying to better the world, and a song like that should have been on an album, should have been a single. Now, it probably wouldn't be a hit single that was released in 1980 or in the 70s, for reasons I just stated. Protest songs weren't much of the rage. But I say to Mo Ostin and everyone at Warner Bros. Records, if you had promoted it and marketed it correctly, it could have been a big hit. But you people literally said that you wanted songs about guys in love with girls to be hits instead. And that's why the 80s became known for power pop ballads instead of for protest songs, although there were quite a lot of great protest songs in the 80s. Land of Confusion by Genesis, for one. I'm a big fan of that song. But it was just too ubiquitous with all those power pop ballads. And I'm a fan of ballads. I'm a huge fan of ballads. But there were just so many that it got to be too much. Paul McCartney was writing power ballads before there was even a name for it, before it was even cool. There aren't too many power ballads from George Harrison, because he's not that kind of person who writes that kind of song. This is the kind of song he sings. He sings what's personal to him. He sings what is on his mind. But record labels don't want someone like that too much. And in future videos, I want to discuss how the Beatles, when they were a group together, they had to really fight with the record label to get what they wanted. And then as solo artists, George, John, and Paul, well, not John so much, but George, Paul, and Ringo had major issues with their record labels. Especially Paul and George, who, as I just mentioned, had record labels who interfered in their work and really ruined what could have been much better albums. For example, Paul and Wings being forced to make Red Rose Speedway a single album, not a double. I will get more into that in a future video. But anyway, back to George. Tears of the World, if you have not heard it, you need to go hear it. You need to hear it. Because it is one of my favorite of any protest song of any kind. Because George really cared. George was ahead of his time in singing about warmongers and criticizing capitalism and criticizing big business. He sings about how big business is calling every tune in the song, a theme that he picked up on in later songs in the 80s that I'll talk about later. But anyway, let's go to another song that was rejected there. And another song rejected was Lay His Head, which was officially released later on in 1987 as a B-side to the single Got My Mind Set On You. It was the B-side. I recently bought this single at my local record shop, I believe 2 years ago. I remember it being 2 years ago. That was a good day. And again, Lay His Head has hit single potential written all over it. But Mo Ostin didn't see that because it's not about a guy in love with a girl. Lay His Head is actually about Beatlemania when you learn about it. Lay His Head is very similar to Don't Bother Me, the first song George Harrison ever wrote, when you think about it. It's just about someone who can't find a place of his own to lay his head, which was how the Beatles were back during Beatlemania. No time to themselves. And I have to say, these 4 songs I'm going to talk about were made with the same exact band that George had when he made the album Cloud 9. The album Cloud 9 was a huge success. So with the same band made this album that was a huge success, why couldn't these 4 songs be a success? Come on, Mo Ostin. But Lay His Head, again, it has hit potential written all over it. You've got this beautiful slide guitar by George, a slide guitar virtuoso. You've got this lovely melody where he's singing, I love you, I love you. He has nowhere to lay his head. Hit single written all over it. Hit single. You could even have marketed it as, oh, this is about Beatlemania. They wouldn't really do that, though, because they don't know what they're doing. Lay His Head is just, it's an incredible trip to put on the record player. And it's George Harrison telling a story about what he was feeling during Beatlemania. And I really think there are other George songs during the 80s where he's reliving Beatlemania in a way, such as Cockamamie Business, where he's singing about going on in Sullivan in this very wry, humorous way. And also I think that Handle With Care, the Wilburys song, Traveling Wilburys, is about how traumatic being a Beatle was for George Harrison. That's what I believe. And now I'm going to mention the other 2 songs. The first one being Flying Hour. Now, Flying Hour is very similar in its message to the Beatles song Tomorrow Never Knows. Tomorrow Never Knows was about John dropping acid, and Flying Hour is about George meditating and getting away from the old days of being a Beatle. Now again, It was made with the same band that George Harrison had during Cloud9 when he made the album. The same band that included Jim Keltner, session drummer. I am the biggest cheerleader of Jim Keltner. Jim Keltner was a session drummer who played on albums by George Harrison, John Lennon, Ringo Starr, Roy Orbison, and Eric Clapton, and many, many others. And he made their albums better. But yet he's not in the Hall of Fame. And he's not celebrated as such. But you had Gary Brooker on synthesizer on this album, on these songs rather, Ray Cooper on percussion, Willie Weeks on bass, Neil Larson on keyboards, and you can learn all of this in this book right here, The Music of George Harrison, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, by Simon Lang. This is all about the solo music of George Harrison, except for the final album, because the book wasn't written before the final album. But Flying Hour is all about George Harrison's soul, and it's all about him as a spiritual person. And while I'm not a spiritual person, I love and I respect that George Harrison was. And I love that he was singing about it in this song in a way that was not preachy at all, was not arrogant at all, was not self-righteous at all. And since you did have some songs in the 80s about spirituality, like Faith by George Michael, that was a huge hit, and Papa Don't Preach by Madonna, which was a huge hit, why couldn't this song be a hit single like those? Again, marketing plays a big part in what a hit single is. And I know George, because of how these record labels were, and how the business was that time, George just got fed up and became a movie producer. And maybe we're better off for it. I have not seen all the Handmaid's Tale films that George produced, but maybe that's all worth it. I don't know. Okay, now I'm going to get to the last of these 4 songs. And that would be Sat Singing, which, like Flying Hour, is also about meditation of George. Yeah, it's really, again, it's got this beautiful melody, and I love his singing on this so much. And if the Harrison estate is listening, the Harrison family, Danny Harrison, Olivia Harrison, we need to get these 4 songs officially released on an EP or something like that. I hope that they know about these 4 songs. Maybe they don't, I don't know. But this needs to be an official release someday. If you know about these 4 songs, if you were old enough to get them when they came out on a record back in 92, called The Songs of George Harrison, please let me know in the comments if you did. I was only 2 years old then, I couldn't get that. But I've learned about these songs recently. Tears of the World I've had on this CD since I was 16. Lay His Head I've only known about 2 years. The other 2 I'm just now learning about. And I just think anybody who's a new young Beatles fan learning about these would really, really love them. Again, they just sound so fresh and so new. And it's such a shame that in the 80s, music was all about what's new and kicking out who was old. And I know every decade was like that, but it got to be too much in the 80s. Anyway, thank you so much for watching.